super excited to see you guys. Super excited to be talking about backfill strategies and how to staff an implementation project. Before we get started, we do want to bring on my colleague, Gabrielle. She's going to give us a little background on the BHive, how you can come on stage, how you can interact with us. So Gabrielle, you want to take it away?
Yes, I will. We're so happy to have all of you here. Thank you for coming and being a part of this. So in order to interact with us, we don't want this to be just a one-directional show. It's really about collaborating together, sharing ideas together. Liz, of course, is going to kind of take the lead on the strategy, but we would love to hear, also from you, like what's working at your campus, maybe what's not. You can drop all of that into the chat. I will be monitoring the chat. So whatever you place in there, I can either bring up or I can, just interrupt at any point, which I know some of you have seen. And for those of you who are tuning in from LinkedIn, which is super amazing, or YouTube, I believe you do not have the ability to comment directly or interact with us in the same way. So if you'd like the link to actually join the platform that we're on so you can have more of that ability, please just drop it in the LinkedIn or YouTube. I will be monitoring that as well. And then one more thing was if you would like to come on stage to chat with us, have a conversation, ask questions, share your opinion, please let us know in the chat. We currently do not have the ability to have you request to come up to stage. So you will need to just go ahead and post it in the chat that you'd like to come up and talk with all of us. And I believe that is it. As always, be respectful of each other. This is really not a I'm disagreeing with you kind of conversation. It's, I disagree with this idea because we want this to be a place where we kind of challenge each other, but we also grow together and try to keep your contributions a little bit time-wise conscientious. Not what I'm doing right now, which is rambling on and on. So I will go ahead and just leave it at that. Team, if you think I forgot anything, please let me know. And yeah, looking forward to this. I'll be here in the background.
Thanks, Gabrielle. I want to bring on now Nick Morosco, who you've seen with me, and also Matt Alex to kick us off on this great conversation. We have some slide that we're going to present, but I think, Nick, if we want to kick it off with slide number one, I think what we want to do is go into a little bit of background here for everybody. We don't want to assume that you guys have been through a huge, large-scale project and that you know what it takes to run a project like that. So we want to give a little background to the conversation that we're going to have right now. And we want to show you what our interpretation through our experience. Nick and I have done multiple projects on different platforms on the customer side, on the consulting side. And so, Nick, if you don't mind, or Ro, don't mind sharing that first slide, we want to walk you through just what life looks like for a person who is participating in a project. So this slide's really looking at maybe somebody who is a lead on a project. This might be someone from your records office. It might be someone from your student financials, financial aid, might be someone from HR, might be someone from payroll. But our assumption here is that their expected workload is 20 hours a week on the project. So mind you, they're still maintaining some of their workload back in their office, right? And so this would be a 50% time on the project. But as you can see, as we start to break down the different responsibilities that someone has leading an actual work stream like payroll or like financial aid, you start to see that really creeps up. That 20 hours may not be a realistic expectation. It may be closer to 33 hours, maybe closer to 40 hours. We're breaking it down by a lot of the things that they would be responsible for. And what's really interesting, having been on the customer side, is I found that I was really responsible a lot for one of these last bullets in the second column, internal project alignment and as a liaison to the organization. I came from a medium-sized R1 institution, but I also had to liaise with many, many different offices across campus to push through some of the initiatives that we were looking to do through the project. So we conservatively gave 3 hours to that, but I think many of you will find that that's probably where most of your time is spent, trying to make a decision and getting everybody aligned across campus. So we want to kick off this conversation with this slide just to sort of set the stage. And then we want to now talk about what are the realistic expectations for somebody who is going to lead a major work stream on any project. And it really doesn't matter what platform it is. If this is a student information system installation, you're going to have people who have to own different sections of the system. And so what we're going to talk about here is it a realistic expectation that someone can keep doing their job and also lead a work stream and participate? Do you create a strategy around more business analysts so that somebody from the offices who is the subject matter expert doesn't have to be 100% on the project? Do you ask your system implementator to take on a larger role? Do you, all these different things that we want to talk about here today, all these different strategies. There's no one size fits all. We want to be very clear. Every institution is going to come with their own challenges, their own opportunities, their own ideas of how these things should work, maybe from doing it in the past, etc. So I'm going to hand it over to Nick. Do you want to kick us off, get us started here with some of the strategies I just discussed?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you everyone for joining us. And as you're looking at this slide, I just want to point out a few additional things. And, in addition to what Liz had mentioned here, and, you could probably slice and dice these hours for a project leads week a million different ways. Maybe it's 3 hours of work stream and only 2 hours of validation or strategy or whatnot. But the reality is we're asking a lot of team members on these projects. They're playing a lot of roles. They are probably playing some new roles that they have never had to fill at their institutions before. And they may or may not have a big team, so these theoretically could be divided up amongst a small team. They could go to one person. It all kind of varies by the size of your team, the size of your organization, and really the goals of your project. So, this 33 could easily be 40. It could easily turn into 60, or maybe if it's a smaller project, it could drop clear down to, 10 to 15. But some of the things we want to talk through today are really even this idea of a part-time project team member. How does that leave the space for that person to do the best they can on the project? That, leaving the time to think through how they're transforming your organization, completing these tasks successfully, making time even for meetings. All projects have a lot of meetings. So just the time spent sitting in these virtual calls or in person, it takes quite a chunk out of a person's week. So a lot of our conversation today will focus on what can we be doing and what should we be doing as part of our tasks on the project, and also how can we minimize our time on the project. So I want to bring Matt into this before we go much further to talk about one of his favorite topics of what should we be doing on the project and how can we be more efficient. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind introducing us to one of your favorite topics of client time on projects and kind of where you like to push us to think here.
Yeah. So we talk about CTOP. That's how we use the terminology. It's client time on project. One of the things as I've been doing this for 20 plus years, 25 plus years, I realized that things that we do are really not as efficient as they should be. Projects are inundated with hours of resources just doing tasks that kind of fill in the blank of getting to a timeline or a milestone. And so one of the things that I've told our team as we started to build out Beyond was we have to be consultants. We have to bring the value of our knowledge to the table. And one of the things that comes from that is that it requires less time from the client, because the client should be there to answer the type of questions we need or give us the analysis that we need. But we need to be consultants, and we need to be very effective in our consulting model, because right now, even our implementations are very cost inefficient, right? I would say it's very inefficient. We have to start thinking about client time on project, because we're now also asking, not only are you spending a lot of money on consulting, you're asking resources to then spend a lot of time on a project, and 40 hours because that's how many hours we allocate to implementations times, the 50 weeks or whatever, 2 years, 100 weeks. We just automatically just assume, yeah, we're just gonna fill in the blank of hours. And I think we just got to be very cost effective. So Nick, you made the comment about getting information from clients. I think we're in a different world now. We have to think about getting information from a client different than sitting in meetings. A meeting shouldn't take up 60 minutes of anyone's time on certain topics. It's a lot of just time that's burned out. So we got to become more efficient in our meetings. We got to be more efficient in our analysis. Because all of this will then reduce the time for our clients to be consuming around the configuration. One, we're consultants. We should be telling and expecting you to give you the 3 models of how this should be designed and being very effective. And then we should be giving a roadmap for them to pick it and then give them the pros and cons of why they would pick those 3, especially in a cloud world, right? It's very standardized. So client time on project is one of those factors that I believe we have to really address. Even when I saw the slide, my team saw this, sent this to me, I was like, 33 hours, we should be reducing that. Because our goal is to configure and then allow people to interact with the system that we're configuring, because these are systems that are already kind of pre-built. It isn't like my old PeopleSoft days when I'm building it from scratch, where I had to configure everything by one. But when you adopt a cloud product, you're adopting the best practices of that configuration. So you need to know what are the 3 best ways of doing it. And that's where consulting comes into play. And Nick, I know that I might have taken you guys off a little bit, but the only way we're going to have really effective CTOP is for our consulting to be much more effective in the way we interact with our clients, as well as the implementation of that software that we're going to be putting in.
Yeah, and we can stay on this topic. I mean, I think in the world of consulting, I think people do a really, really nice job with what they have and the information they have, right? And we've kind of starting to cycle through the years, 30 plus years of PeopleSoft and Ellucian products, Genzabar products, etc. I think there's a new wave of consultants coming in. So there is possibly a way to make this happen, this different reality for folks. But also, Matt, I think there's some responsibility on the client to know where they're trying to go, right? And so I think part of reducing the number of hours and client time on a project is to already come to the project with some knowledge and understanding about what the project entails and how it's sort of going to work and what the flow is going to look like. B, what they want to do, right? If I'm coming out of a system that's 20 years old, I'm going to try to figure out, these are the processes that don't work for me. These are the directions I want to go in that haven't been the direction we've been able to go in for the last 10 years and have already kind of done some of this really hard work. I want to talk about that. Like, how do clients do that hard work before to help the consultants when they do show up, give them those options based on the information they have, right?
So if you think about it, one of the goals is to cut over and move yourself from a legacy system into a new cloud or new system of whatever you're putting in, whether it's cloud, SIS, ERP, CRM. Your number one goal is, how do I move from legacy to something else? So that's one of the goals. The second goal is, how do we adopt the best practices of that legacy, of that new product, and how do we align that in a way so you can function more effective? That's 2. And then the third is, how do we sunset things that are unnecessary inside of the new software? And so when I ask people to be prepared, I don't know if they would be able to do 2 and 3. I think they could do 1, which is, how do I get myself from legacy into something new? That means I can think about the data dictionary. I can think about the alignment of those values. How does but they still don't understand the new capabilities. So they think of it, their new capabilities in the cloud of what they do today. And that's where I think we struggle. So when we're asking people, we're the consultants, and when we're asking our clients to paint the picture, they're going to paint the picture of what they know. And that's where I think we are going to struggle, because they're going to paint the picture of what they know, and they're going to keep doing old processes. And that's what we've been doing since the 1990s. Our current design of our SISs are from when we did manual stuff, when we didn't have a computer, and we still manage it today. So I push back a little bit in terms of, our clients need to come in and give us this. I don't think they're sophisticated, well-versed at that world at this moment. They may think it is because they know legacy.
Yeah.
We're not. We shouldn't be designing legacy. We should be designing the future workflows, the future of that campus, the model of a lifelong learner, fit for purpose, anytime, anywhere. You have to have that model. And of course, you still have to deal with all the nuances of legacy to come in. But I don't think right off the bat, we would get clients to give us really value on direction, because they don't know the direction. I hate to say that. Yeah.
So does this mean that we have to maybe live in a world where there are different types of consultants, right? Is this a world where we have consultants that do the pre-planning, that have the time maybe with the client, have 12 to 18 months to sit down and really iterate and work through that? Or do we put this on the system implementers when they show up and ask them to get that done in a finite amount of time while putting in a new system?
Yeah, I think consulting has to change holistically, because right now we have implementers, configurers, considered consultants, and they're not really consultants on the actual transformation. I hate to say that. Right. They're configuring it. Half of them have never worked outside of multiple institutions. Half of them never even put in the product that they're consulting on. They've never done it maybe as a user. Like, just look at the people in the room and you will recognize they don't press. Those implementers are configuring. Don't mistake configuring to designing. It's a different thing. Designing may not necessarily even entail configuring. It may be designing different processes, different flows, different policies, so that's when you said, is it before? I think it is before. But even in our current world, even the pre-vendor salespeople, the ones that are doing the RFPs, they're thinking about the technology that you're asking them to look for. They're not thinking about the campus transformation. Right. I think you're going to have to bring consultants in, a little bit ahead of time to shake the trees out and say, you may need to do this. And the scary thing about it to the vendors is it may actually recognize it isn't a system issue. It's a policy issue. It's a procedure issue. This is why the vendors don't want a lot of pre-work, because they're afraid. But I will be honest with you. I think they all need to get to a new SIS. I think they all need to get to an ERP. We can't live like that. We just got to design to a new type of SIS, which is all capable of being done really effectively. But they're afraid of the conversation, and they don't have the business case to do that. And that's one of the biggest issues.
Well, and that's what's really interesting. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Well, I like where that's going with. This is kind of going down a separate theme. I think we brought up through several of these sessions is the pre-planning and what do you do to get ready for your project. This concept of CTOP and what we do once the project starts is kind of buried in what's the magic recipe of what we're seeing on the screen here. I think the real magic that we're talking to so far is, well, what did you do before you got to this point? Do we really need 4 hours of strategy if we put in a year of strategy before the project started? Do we really have 2 hours of data conversion a week if we already pulled our data and did some data cleansing 3 years earlier? A lot of these numbers and things we're looking at here are really based on, to your point, Matt, RFP, project starts, has a small plan phase, and now we're hitting the ground running. You don't get a lot of time to sit and think and innovate and try new things, experiment. You kind of go down the path, and that's where you land with well, we know it works now. Let's move forward because we have 10 other work streams that are depending on us today. So yeah, these numbers are very, what's the right way to say it? Implementation has already started specific.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
there's a whole conversation to talk about how do we adjust these. And I think it really does start with what did you do the year to 2 to 3 years before your project started?
Yeah, and I want to bring up, because I'm going to bring this back around to backfill, because I absolutely think the conversation we just had is completely relevant, because it goes to two different things. And Dan just pointed out, Matt, that we want to reiterate the point you just made, that there is a very big difference between configuration, design, and kind of innovation for the future, or for where your campus is trying to go. But then Tina brought up a good point too, that in putting their backfill strategy together, I think, Tina, you said, committing to something that we don't fully understand, right? And so this idea of having done some pre-planning, having actually looked through your process, your procedure, looked at the people that are processing things, the systems, the structures that you've built, and maybe you built those structures because that's what you needed for your old SIS, but it's not necessarily a structure you want to carry forward into the future. I think that then gives the folks, as you're building your backfill strategy, it takes some of that ambiguity out of it, because they're like, I was part of these meetings. I was part of taking the 15 calendars we had and eliminating 10 of them, so that we only have 5 calendars that we're moving forward. And that's the future we're looking towards, is 5 calendars, and our courses structured in this way, our rules structured in this way. It takes that ambiguity away from that. So I'd love to hear what you guys think, because I do. I think it takes the ambiguity away, and you could maybe put somebody in the role for 50% of the time. And they're going to, exceed expectations. They're going to excel because they already have some of these conversations in their back pocket.
Can I just make this point really quick? If you want to do a lift and shift, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with going and saying to your community, your sponsors, whoever is funding it, we're just going to get to a new system. We're going to do the same thing in a new system. And so this is what it's going to cost us. There's nothing wrong with that. A lift and shift, there's nothing wrong. And you could be a more effective campus if you're doing a lift and shift. The only thing I would say to you is, don't waste $40 million. Don't waste $20 million. Because that doesn't require you to invest that much. So what happens is you waste dollars on the lift and shift, when the lift and shift is really easy. I can configure, I can customize, I can move it over. Like, that is a very easy transactional stuff. And then you have to say to them, lift and shift to the new processes. So all you're doing is doing it the way the new cloud product is doing. Those are assumptions. And if you make those assumptions, your implementations should be much cheaper. Your backfill shouldn't be as much, because you're not asking for a lot of redesign and thinking about the future. And even, I think that's what I want to make sure people realize.
Yeah, we have a slide for that too, Matt. We got a slide illustrating that, that we're going to bring up for sure. But I get what you're saying, and that makes sense, right? Bringing it back to the backfill. You don't really need a backfill at that point. It's somebody just basically telling you how they do their job on a daily basis. And there's really no innovation. There's no thought to it. There's no change or transformation, really. You might get hung up here or there with the new system doing it a slightly different way, but
and I said this yesterday to a set of colleagues I was with. I said, consulting is like therapy. You sit in front of people and they tell you all their problems. They tell you what they're struggling with. And they feel good. And then you give them this inspirational, like, we're going to go change that. Oh, we're going to go expect you to do it. And the reality, lift and shift doesn't change any of that. Your world. So you're giving them false hope on that therapy. And that isn't the design. What you have to think about is you have to get them to realize in therapy, the problem may not be the technology. The therapy may be your campus has to reimagine and reinvest and spend the time, because you've never spent the time. All you've been doing is staying underwater trying to keep your SIS up, and you've been living that dream for so long. And this is the opportunity to say, you know what? We got $40 million. I'm going to take a set of those $1 million, and I'm going to design us to be a very effective campus. So I could be effectively designing, using AI. I can start doing analysis better. I can ask what the future is. I can think about workflows. I can think about all the dependencies. I think that's a really good conversation we should be having. It shouldn't be therapy that we have in there.
Nick, what is at stake? If you don't have a sound backfill strategy, if you haven't done the work ahead of even finding a new SIS or a new system for almost anything, but also just haven't done the work before the implementation starts, what is at stake?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I think that's the story of many of these projects, right? Is you have a short plan stage, you jump into some form of a design configuration stage where you're learning the system. You're oftentimes learning what your institution does, because you're not necessarily always staffed with the most senior representatives of the college. So you're learning your college, you're learning the product, and you're making decisions on what you want the future to look like. And that's a lot to ask for team members very quickly, all at once. And then you say, oh, and by the way, you have 12 months before we need to see this in a test stage, because we're going live in 2 to 3 years. So the what's at stake is that's where your burnout's coming from. That's where your rush decisions, your lack of focus on the high priority transformations, all those are the kind of things that if you haven't put the time in up front, the team easily loses focus and so it kind of gets distracted on why are we doing this in the first place? And then you're almost settling for the bare minimum, because there comes a point where you've put 2 years into this and you almost just have to go live and then figure out how to grow from there, which is also a strategy. So maybe we should go ahead, and we mentioned that slide. Maybe we jump ahead here. I can switch to kind of looking at the end first and then coming back to some of this. But we put together a slide to illustrate this idea of what kind of project implementation strategies exist out there and what the costs are. And I do want to start at the end here at the far right and say the total cost of all these is expensive. These all take a ton of time, ton of money. There's no truly fast, quick, cheap way to do this, but there's lots of different ways to spend your money on the areas that are important to your organization. So, some of these models we talked about, you go lift and shift, which I would argue is kind of your MVP rapid deployment. Just build what you have, get the answers from your the staff at your college, and you go live, but you barely spend any time learning the system and being trained on how to manage it. Those are the projects that end with substantial, on-site consultant presence for the next year to 2 years of stabilization. And then, fast forward to the bottom option here, where you really will look at pre-planning and transformation. You spent so much time on the front end that you kind of know what the end goal is. The decisions flow faster, the communications are cleaner. You have time to learn. So now you're actually taking ownership of your system. In total, you've probably actually spent about the same total effort across extra years, but you are now, like I said, fully owning your system. You are making changes post-implementation. You have a roadmap, all those kind of things that really look towards that 10, 15, 20-year planning. And then there's everything in between. And I think, to me, the hardest part here is I think there's the ideal, and then there's our realities. And the ideal is, everything we've talked about so far. How do you minimize client time on the project? How do we maximize learning? How do we maximize transformation? But we all have to deal with the turnover, the short, the insufficient staffing, lack of interest in projects, lack of support, all the challenges that we could go on and on about. So that's where I think the reality is we're somewhere between all 4 of these options is where most projects land, but 4 being probably the ideal.
And the reality of all 4 of these options too is that there is this human element and this human component to this. And so you are always sort of borrowing and stealing and asking favors of people to come and participate in these meetings, come and participate in this transformation. I want you to really rethink and reimagine how you would do your job. I need, the person from academic side to go out and to rally the faculty around getting rid of 10 different calendars, right? And having to now reimagine maybe some of their courses that they taught on these shorter calendars, and things like that. Like, this is a lot of social capital. It's a lot of political capital on campus. I think Nick and I, having both been on the customer side, worked in higher ed for decades, we recognize that. So I think part of your backfill strategy is understanding that these folks need to have a lot of autonomy. And I think the key is, and Nick, I want you to pick this up and talk about this. I think the key to being super successful and having really successful conversations that keep moving and don't really stagnate is to empower the people that you are using to run these projects. And it is not a small team. And even at a small liberal arts college, it is not a small team, right? You have all the different offices across campus that really do need to have a say. And I'm talking all the way down to your study abroad office. I'm talking your international student office, your dining, your housing. Everyone has a role in a full SIS implementation. So, Nick, I want you to take away and talk about empowering people, allowing people to make decisions so that we can keep projects moving forward.
Yeah, I like that theme. An empowered team, moves forward confidently. They confidently communicate the vision of the project to the campus at large. They are willing to fail fast. We all talk about, experiment with that new feature, see if it's going to, meet the needs of your organization. If it doesn't, move on to the next idea. But that takes confidence that actually starts kind of top down. You have to encourage those fast failures. A lot of people aren't just going to have the confidence to do that on their own. I think that's where I'll go with that. It's one of those where there's so many moving parts that you can't be everywhere all the time. And your individual leaders on each work stream really just have to feel that they are trusted to move the institution forward through the decisions they're making, knowing that there will be a chance to revisit and test and confirm these decisions. And, when I also think of, the client time on project principles, that's where some of the most valuable things that those same leaders are going to do is communicate out those decisions back to the campus. So as much as we need them making the decisions, they need to be able to clearly articulate those back out to the campus. And that's where you see the buy-in and the change management really start to hit home.
I think if you find the really good consultants, they're the ones that actually have done post-production support. In our market, the best consultants have always been the ones that have gone through test cycles and production support. Those are the best consultants out there, right? I think that's similar to what we have to do with staff when they're coming into a project. Nick, you talk about iterations of working on stuff. The fact that the cloud products are already somewhat pre-built. I mean, I know pre-built is sounds so simple, but what I'm getting at is the functionality, the design, the flows. Those are all common standard things that other institutions are doing, right? So part of this exercise is exposing them to that, because some of what the resistance we're going to get is they don't understand what it means to be in that tenant and that functionality. And it is that iteration, Nick, is probably one of the most important things. Not only are they going to learn the capabilities, they're going to learn the limitations, they're going to learn the opportunity, they're going to be able to rethink through that. But it's that exposure to that product. And that's what I think the benefits of the cloud are, because it gives you that much more. We're going to have gaps because the cloud isn't built for everybody. It's built in a common best practice model. So you have to figure out, how does that work for us and where doesn't it work for us? And that's okay for it not to work, but how do we work around it? And that's how good consultants are. They work around it. Things that we've done in PeopleSoft and Banner, we've adjusted, even though it wasn't intentionally built that way, we did use it. And I think that's the same thing we'll have to do for cloud as we go through the process. But exposing clients to that is probably as important as sitting around having a conversation about a design, exposing them to the design.
Yeah, and as I flip back to this slide as you were saying that, because I think if I could, reweight this distribution of where the time goes, a question I could ask is, do we really want to reduce a person's workload down to 20 hours a week, or do we want to reduce this workload down to 20 hours a week so that other 20 is spent in the system? Do we really say it's call it a 40-hour week role, but it's because we want to free up way more time to learn, the system in and out, get in there, build reports, learn to manipulate the data, try every feature. Don't just try the first one because that's all you had time for. So again, thinking of this client time on the project premise, I think there's a lot of value in just reducing this administrative overhead, less time in meetings, all those things. But, if it makes more room for the innovation and the time in the system, all that does is improve the system, the total outcome at the end, and the supporting and owning the system as an organization.
So I think to get there, we need to have a backfill strategy that puts leads in place, that gives them autonomy, gives them the ability to make fast decisions, gives them the ability to fail, right? Without having anybody sitting there going, why did you make this decision? If we're thinking about a project having a strategy, yeah, absolutely. I think having a project that's 18 to 24 months, even a fast 12-month project. But I think the idea that somebody can, without having 6 different meetings across campus, just say, I've learned that the system functions like this. These are our policies and procedures. I'm going to go try to figure out what that looks like in this new world. And then I will go communicate out to everybody that here's our original policies and procedures. Here's how the system currently functions, because they were given the time, Nick, to your point, to go into the system and to learn it and to test it and try to break it and then figure out what their policies and procedures are. I think oftentimes in higher ed, we want people to constantly be running things by other people. It's death by committee, death by meeting, and we don't ever get to a decision. And so if we allow our leads to run these projects in an autonomous way until they get to what the recommendation is going forward, then you can have the meetings and then you can vet it out. And they become your subject matter experts in the system. To Nick's point, they've now spent hours and hours every single week really refining and understanding what the system does and how it works. They might have, and Nick, I want to talk about this next. I want to talk about the strategy of using business analysts or increasing I think we've had this conversation, and some of you on here probably know this idea of techno-functional. And our colleague Christina Kelpie always talks about this too, techno-functional, right? And so are your business analysts techno-functional folks? Do you expand your business analyst role to help the folks that are leading these work streams? And now they have all of this knowledge, you have depth on your bench. Nick, what do you think about this strategy? Where do you think that should go in the future?
Yeah, I think that's also a great question. And I would add, in addition to how you use your techno-functional type audience, your business analysts on the project, you really want to start thinking early on how you plan to use them after the project. I've seen many projects where you have this mentality that there is a project team that then, as soon as this project's done, we're going to move them to the next project. You're basically a project professional. You take all that business analyst skill and then you apply it to the next tool set, which is a very valid way to do projects, but it also means you leave some of that subject matter expertise behind and some of that learning, that kind of inherent learning that happens by being in the system. So as you're designing your team and your backfill strategy, you kind of want to look at, are the people I'm putting on the project now the people who I expect to support it in 3 years and beyond, and build effectively from there. So a lot of that depends on your organization's situation. Do you have the staff to do that? If not, that's where I think a lot of projects end up in a bind. You've got maybe a registrar serving as the registrar and as the student records functional lead. That's a very tough request. If they're trying to learn the system, manage day-to-day operations, and have a team to keep an eye on. So at the end of the day, I think how you use your business analyst is one of the biggest things to consider, both in backfill, because that's another group that could help in the office while the project is going on, and then also, as I said, during and post-project.
Hey, Tina, you kind of commented on the whole formal and informal written communication in terms of like telling stories, visual. Can you give us a little bit of your thoughts on that? And how does that help plan for the workload, or even, how to set because some of this is setting expectations, right? So give us a little bit of that. And I know you're at Rising, so I'm sure you might have a little bit of background, but go ahead.
So we were, even before we selected an implementation partner, we were prepping area leadership with the idea at some point we're going to need a financial aid lead, an admissions lead, a records lead. So they already kind of had that in their mind. And then as we were reviewing RFPs and once we selected a partner, we had a little more detail of what they thought that work would entail, like a full-time FTE, part-time FTE, or a 0.5 FTE, things like that. But what we were having a little bit of trouble communicating to leadership was, this is what it means to you to pull someone from from your team for the project at a 1 FTE equivalent. So think about who would be a good fit based on, these are the characteristics we're looking for. The type of work they're doing for you now, can that work be divided up? Can it be backfilled by someone outside the department? And then we also started hearing from our stakeholders, we don't actually want to backfill. And it wasn't about not giving us someone. It was simply about our work is so specialized, we will try to make do without bringing in a third party. And once we were able to have a project timeline, and now we have a team structure, we continue to go back. This is also what we know. We're going to need some subject matter experts in addition to your lead potentially. And this is what we think that effort would be. So I like that first slide in this presentation where it's like 3 hours a week at this and 5 hours a week at this, because that's the stage we're in right now. We're saying during this period or this work set, we're going to need your FTE or we're going to need your lead full-time. Let's just not negotiate that. But your SMEs will probably come in and out. And so maybe you can plan for that differently. The other thing that we did at our institution is it wasn't just about bringing in a new body for backfill. We really started asking leadership to think about what are the ways they can build capacity. For example, maybe we stop on the ongoing new initiation of projects for 6 months a year. So it was more about capacity building in addition to backfill than simply we need to bring in someone else.
And when we think about this type of, we estimated these out, these are estimates. I think for every campus, it's slightly different, right? Because you may have different things that you may have someone who's more specialized in something they don't. I think you're going to have to move the levers around a little bit, correct? In terms of what it is for each one.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one size fits all. That's Nick and I were trying kind of very hard to put these together as sort of your conservative estimate of what somebody would be doing on a project, but it's definitely not one size fits all. And we also have to remember, and we have to think, and I think Tina, you guys are going into your student project, right? But you have to remember all of the folks that just finished a project that are also going to be part of that. So you have payroll, you have faculty pay you have to discuss, you have HR that you have to bring back in for a number of different things. You have finance, right? Now finance finally gets looped back in because you have to start mapping everything to the GL from your student side. And so I think we also need to remember that even though other parts of our project might be complete, or maybe we're not moving to a new finance system, we're not changing HR, but we need to remind those folks that we also actually need to loop them into the project. And if it's more significant than they anticipate, they may have to have a backfill strategy too for some of those areas, just depending on what it is. No, I really appreciate your insight. That was awesome. I like the idea of just looking at capacity, right? Asking that question first. Do you have capacity to give us somebody, and not, maybe you don't have to backfill them, right? Maybe there's other people you can lift up in the office who can then slide into that role while this person is gone. And so now you are actually creating an additional, much deeper bench in your office. These projects are really long, and you know that people come and go all the time. And so that's actually not leaving you out in the cold. If someone is to leave, it actually allowed you to move people up, which is always nice in some of these offices.
Yeah, and just to get a little more chatter going in the comments here, if anybody else wants to join us on stage, I'd be interested to hear if we have anybody who's recently been through a project, or even if you've heard it from others who are post-project, what are some of the things you wish you would have made more time for throughout the project, and maybe things you could have enabled if you had more backfill. I've never been on a project where everybody feels like they had too much free time. I don't think that exists, because if you have free time on the project, you're probably helping your original office. But
Yeah.
What are some of those things that you all have observed, in addition to the deeper learning that we've talked about a few times here? I'd be very interested to hear some additional feedback and ideas. I have my own suspicions and things I've observed, but yeah, the more you can pave the way for folks to really have that deep learning, deep understanding of the system, that's where I really see the smoothest go lives. Post go live, when you know how to troubleshoot, because you've been in the system the whole project and not just providing, data by worksheets. Those are the projects that do really, really well, as they're supporting and growing the system for the 2 and 3 years after implementation.
Yeah, and as we wait to see if there's some audience members who want to join us, I think, Nick, you brought up a really, really good point, because some of the things that are on here, they're a little bit lost in our list here, but a big piece of this is training, right? Training and change management, helping people to understand, and I think you have to appreciate all the moving parts and pieces of these implementations, right? Your training is not just on, hey, here's the new system, here are our policies and procedures, here's where we had to change things a little bit to accommodate the way this new system works, but it's also all of your integrations. All of your integrations may be coming into the system slightly differently. I always told my folks, I want you to understand how this integration works so that you can help to troubleshoot if something happens and it's not an immediate message off to IT, something broke this morning, and you can't explain anything to IT about what broke or how it broke or what you think might have happened. So you have integrations that people need to be trained on. You have the new system. You have, as Nick's mentioned, ways of reporting, right? In the old system, maybe you had the ability to just immediately report, go write a quick report or go write a quick algorithm to pull some data out. And this system works very differently. So needing to learn how to pull your data out of the system as a worker in the office is going to be very different. It's going to require a considerable amount of training. It may even require new security. You might not have security just immediately do that like you did in the last system. So I think when we talk about these strategies and we say that this should come with deep knowledge and understanding of the system and lots of time in the system, we're also talking about after you've gone live, not just the implementation. Who's going to be the person who, when a new patch comes out or there's new regulations for financial aid, or we have an upgrade to the system, because a lot of these cloud products, the upgrades will be pushed on an annual basis, a biannual basis. And so who's going to actually go in and test the new upgrades, test the new functionality that's in the system? Who's going to have that deep knowledge and understanding if you don't give people that opportunity during the implementation? Do we have any takers? Anybody want to come up?
They're all shy today.
Well, Nick, I mean, I don't want to end on a I don't know, a down note, I guess, if you will. But I mean, we definitely do have one other slide. We want to talk through here really quick, and then we can end up on an upbeat.
We'll bring this back to the last slide after this one. But this is a great visual, so it's worth showing. It's worth talking through. Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so the what's at stake. I think we've said all of these words in some way, shape, or form throughout our discussion so far. But as I think backfill, missed outcomes, execution risks, those are the big obvious ones. And even with a backfill strategy, some of these things are still risks. You're mitigating the risk. You're trying to improve the chances of having a very clean project, but there are still things that happen. So the backfill is a good solid backfill strategy is really just improving your odds and also casting a wider net so you have more hands to help as things happen. Every project has a couple of surprises. The bigger team you have with the more experience, the better you address those kinds of surprises. This first one, though, is one that really always just jumps off a page to me, is the personal impact on the individuals we have on these projects. And, you start talking about without backfill, you do have a loss of time, energy, and focus, and diminished ability to innovate. A burned out team that's multitasking, trying to keep the office running while they're trying to design the future, or they get to the point they're testing for the future, you're just not getting the highest quality work out of some of the best people on your campus. So it's not through lack of effort. There's just a point where the pace just never stops for them. So if nothing else, having some form of backfill, even if it ebbs and flows, maybe it's not a 3-year plan to have an individual completely backfilled where they don't do their job, but during those key times, you find a way to rotate the work and share it amongst the teams. But really just giving people the room to focus and do their best work is, to me, one of the biggest messages that I hope everybody leaves with is the good work comes from the space to do the good work. And a lot of projects really do suffer from trying to do too many things all at once. Too many Zoom meetings where they have one ear on one meeting, the other ear is the other meeting, and they're typing to somebody else who's not in either of those meetings. And that always makes me cringe. But it's real, and it's what we all have to live with on these projects. So yeah, if nothing else, thinking of that want that person and their experience and trying to really focus and deliver the best product they can. The more room we can give the teams that level of focus, I think the better we see project outcomes.
When I look at this list, I always say, what is the opportunity we have, right? So, when in a workload, work stream lead, and the loss of time, and I mean, there is an opportunity for us to reinvent how we have our work leads work, right? How do we more effective, even on project delivery, like maybe meetings, the way that we hold meetings and the way that we are gathering insight from our client, maybe it isn't the right way of doing it. Maybe an hour meeting isn't necessary. Maybe it's what we call impromptu or quick huddles, right? So I think there is an opportunity to reinvent how you become much more effective in the design. And I think you'll get much more out of it if you look at it through an opportunity lens. And with AI and with all the technologies, the advancements, in the old days, we would have to go on site. I mean, I remember having to put in, 40 hours on site, Monday through Thursday. Well, today we live in a much more Zoom or visual Teams, and we have the ability to do that. So we gain hours there. There's so much ways of reinventing. Even our current clients, a lot of them are remote. They're not even on site in their campuses. So I think there's an opportunity to reinvent how we actually run our projects. How do we think about backfill strategies? How do we gain capacity? So the redundancy, the things that they're working that just are mundane. Let's just use technology in a different way. I call it structured work. Like, let's think about the structured work and let's automate all that structured work. And then let's think about the unstructured work that requires humans and how do we bring that to light. So
I love that. And I would say, and I'd love to hear from people in the comments if you agree or you disagree, but I have to say, having done a lot of these implementations before COVID, in the middle of COVID, and then now after COVID, I still think, and I think, it's kind of timely. Apparently, if you've all seen, Amazon is pulling all of their workers back 5 days a week as of January 1st. So a little controversial today, but I honestly think these projects are not possible unless you are all sitting together and working through these things. I'm really concerned that folks are still trying to run, $10 million projects and everybody is just working remote with each other, coming in only when they have to. I don't know that is setting people up for success. I don't know that it's setting the project up for success, honestly. And to your point, Matt, of just how do you work differently? You can still come together and have those efficiencies you're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm a in-person. My clients know I like in-person meetings because that's where I think we engage. You can feel energy. What whiteboarding, like getting up and whiteboarding ideas. Yeah, it's so powerful, right? But do I need to do that for 40 hours times 2,000? No, we probably don't need to do it. Man, putting those in and war rooming it, like Liz, you were on a call with our client today, and I said, hey, next week we need to get into a room and war game this, right? Mm-hmm. And that war game requires us thinking together and seeing that someone may not be as comfortable doing something, or it's good because we can get empathy from that, right? And so I think there is that. I think it's a juggling act. I do believe that people are very ineffective with meetings. I call this out all the time. I call it out in our own firm, right? When I see my folks like, oh, let's have a meeting about next week's meeting. I'm like, oh my God, no, we don't need to do that, right? So we got to be very much more effective. Maybe we have to have a whole PM on just
conversation
on facilitating effective meetings and I want to have a meeting like. And that's so traditional. I'm not saying the meetings aren't important. I think they are. But I think how we run those meetings and
Yeah.
what we're wargaming in those meetings. And because if people are just gurgitating stuff, put it in a video, put it in a bubble, let me hear it, and let's come together knowing this is what everyone's soapbox is. Everyone wants, and I say this all the time. I can't tell you the number when we have pylons in conversation where someone makes a point and somebody needs to tell them they agree with the point and they repeat what that person said. Oh my God, it burns me up when I'm seeing it. So there's this ineffectiveness of meetings that I don't want us to lose that sight, that we should think about re-engineering those meetings.
No, I mean,
Well,
and
you're
I keep
steering me
saying-
into my next transition here, because Liz, I promised you we would not end on the last slide.
Well, let's end on a high
negative.
note, and I have a point to make too. Around what Matt just said. So,
So yeah, go ahead if you have it. And then
I just want to make a really good point. We've talked about a couple times how consulting needs to change, right? Traditional world of system implementation consulting needs to change. And I think you just said something really interesting. You're like, make a bubble, make a video. I can't tell you how many meetings I have sat on where we have just said, hey, how do you do this today? And spent an entire hour somehow just talking about this one tiny little process. The client is giving me their old version because they still don't know how to get in the system and figure out how it's configured in that way. What makes more sense to me if I was still in the same exact game is I'm going to make a video walking them through how you configure that particular thing. I'm going to ship them off with that. And then I'm going to say, I want you to go in the system, follow my cues, but actually build it the way you want it to be done, right? Like just at practice as you're going. And then we can come back and have a meaningful conversation about their policy or their procedure and where it works, where it doesn't work, where they might need to change, where I might need to give them other options and things like that, right? So I think that is one really powerful way that we can start to change how we consult our clients and how we utilize time on projects, right? I don't need to be in 15 hours of meetings a week with my client. I can send them snippets that they can watch at their pace, they can digest at their pace, they can go in the system and walk through. I love that idea.
You could have scripted that better for me here, Liz, because we're
wait a minute. Before we end, how many status meetings are there in the world this week that we will start the beginning of the week with a status, and it's the same thing that they gave us a status on from Friday. So the Friday status and the Monday status, because nothing really happened, is about the same. And then the Wednesday afternoon check-in is the same status. And when all I need is like, could you not put that in writing? Could you not put that into a bubble? Could you not put that, like, don't waste, I say this all the time. Count the people number around you, put $100 worth of dollar amount, and that's the meeting cost. Just think about that. That's the meeting cost. Is $5,000 worth that meeting to tell you the status? So get better effective Slacks, get better effective ClickUps, all the things that we're trying to do. We gotta change the model, because right now some company, some higher ed group is having a meeting on a status, regurgitating what they do.
How many people just drop for their status meeting in 2 minutes here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But
Nick,
that is the theme I wanted to
out.
end on was intention, right? You both have described various forms of moving forward with intention, right? If a traditional project with lots of status updates is your thing, just know that that's what you chose, right? So that's why I wanted to end on this slide here. And Liz, you were describing it really well. It's easy to create a backfill strategy, create your project processes, thinking that you've done this massive pre-plan and transformational effort, and you kind of end with an MVP lift and shift because you lost sight of that somewhere along the way. So really, to me, the theme of this is giving people the space to work, keeping them focused and moving forward with the intention. And everything you just described both of you just described in the last like 2 minutes is this is the background noise that gets in the way of that grander mission. So yeah, so we could have scripted that better.
I love it. Thank you guys so much. This was an awesome conversation. Thank you everybody who joined us today, or everybody who is watching this at 9:00 at night when they come across it on YouTube or LinkedIn. Nick and I have a couple more sessions here in this series, and then we'll hopefully be putting something out on our website that we can share with all of you. And Bill, thank you so much. I love always always awesome. Your insights, we much appreciate it. So thank you guys. We'll see you next time.